EGROW Foundation is chairing today's session on the budget, as well as he'll be chairing the next session on January 1, which will be also on the budget. With this, because of paucity of time, we will just go towards starting the session right away. Dr. Virmani, over to you, please.
Thank you, Charan. So welcome all our participants. Let me start by saying, if we had 7 participants, we had thought of 10 minutes for each would be 70, which would take most of the time, not leave for question and answers. Because there was one less participant, maybe we can make a little, leeway of about 2 minutes, but please try to target 10 minutes. That's one point. Secondly, from my experience of attending, I don't know, a dozen pre-budget meetings or more, 2 dozen actually. What the ministry at this stage looks for is basically points and not kind of long explanations. I mean, they generally ask for explanations. So I would suggest that at least try to make all your main points in that 10 minutes. A little bit of explanation is okay because many of us are academics. We always like to explain everything, but try to keep the explanation to match the time. That said, the finance minister has been speaking and she's outlined a couple of things which she has and which will help you focus your comments. So I think she's kind of mentioned three things. One is, of course, re-accelerating GDP growth. I think she has mentioned, and others members of government have mentioned. So any suggestions on that front would be most welcome. Second is, again, several members of the governments have also been, and including the finance minister, have been talking about the pandemic, the lessons, what special things because of the pandemic we may need to do. And of course, you must remember, though, there's no harm in mentioning things which cannot be done in the budget. But again, the focus we would like to have is on the budget and what can go into the budget. Of course, there are certain related policy things which often can be included. That's fine. And finally, of course, the standard perennial, which is not new, is the infrastructure. So these are the 3 areas which she has mentioned herself. So I thought I'd mention. With that, let me turn to our first speaker, Professor Narendra Pani, who is Professor and Dean of the Indian Institute of Sciences, Bangalore. Professor Pani.
Thank you, Dr.
You're gone. You got muted somehow. I heard you in the beginning, but I can't hear you now. Are you unmuted?
Yeah, is this better?
Yeah.
Fine. Sorry about that. So, as I was saying, thank you for this invitation. I would like to, given the constraints on time and the interest of the other participants as well as the government, I would like to just focus on one particular issue and trying to emphasize why it is necessary to look at it. Clearly, the government this time is looking at recovery, as it should, after a pandemic and the kind of impact it's had on the economy. Recovery is the primary focus. But it's important to look also at the second point the finance minister has made, which is the lessons of the pandemic. Because I think the pandemic also told us things about the economy that we weren't very sure about, or we did not have a very clear idea about. And the most important, I think, of these lessons was with regard to the migrant workers. The sheer size of that community, the way they were stranded, it is a story of its own. But I think there were some indications of the size of this component of the Indian economy through work on circular migration, etc. But I don't think we have any concrete numbers. We still don't, but I think what the pandemic told us and what the migrant crisis told us was it is in tens of millions of workers. It is not a negligible number that can be ignored. And we must recognize that it is a part of our economy now, a critical part of the economy, and dealing with it must be a part, particularly this year, when a part of the budget, particularly this year when we are trying to recover from it. When seen in that form, you can look at it in two ways. One is to simply say that it's a part of the economy. As the economy recovers, you will go back to old migrant practices. But that does not seem entirely likely, because when you're talking of a complete return to the past, you're not talking about about just a few, a large numbers of them coming back. You're talking about all of them coming. Even if 90% of them come back and you have a 10% deficit in migrant workers, you're going to have an upward pressure on the wage rate. And in a competitive global economy and in the areas where the migrant workers have an impact, you're competing primarily through costs. And in those areas, you should expect some kind of a price that might come up if we do that. There is also the impact on bargain, the methods through which these migrant workers work. We have done some work in rural India on the origins, where they come from, particularly in Bihar and Jharkhand. And there you see that essentially there are groups of workers who come together behind a single person who then negotiates for that entire group in different companies and tries to get them assigned a set of tasks. Now, this means that the workers are now negotiating not through trade unions, but through identity groups, if you like, which can move from firm to firm. And then in that process, they also sometimes, the firms might be located in different states. So their association with the firm, unlike trade unionized workers, is very limited. It is for specific tasks, and
used by another.
uh, they can actually be in situations where they can get very volatile. Just a couple of weeks ago in Bangalore, you had the case of Wistron, which makes Apple phones. And the groups of workers there once again came in through a migrant worker network, though they were on the shop floor. And that became extremely volatile and violent, as most of you would know. So essentially, there is a volatility that comes in through this process. This volatility gets increased when we are looking at other say external factors like the pandemic, or more frequently, what you get is this ethnic conflicts, etc., which can generate a great deal of pressure. So as far as the budget is concerned, I think the government would need to take a call as to whether it would like to continue with the same process, in which case it is really trying to identify the conflicts that would emerge and try to ease up on it, right? It would also require a change in the nature of skilling that takes place. Essentially, the process of skilling right now is largely static at one point. It expects workers to go through the skilling process and then find jobs. When you're dealing with the lowest ends of this process, they are not likely to be available. The opportunity cost of getting trained is very often too high for them. So as a result of which you tend to get less trained workers, and whatever skills they learn from each other, and that has an impact on the quality of the product that comes out. So what you would need is to develop a kind of mobile training platforms that move with the workers, train them in the process, and so that by the time they land and settle down into a new area, they are much more skilled than when they started out. This is something that uh, will is worth considering and would take some amount of effective planning to do that. But if you go on to the longer term aspects of the process, may be time to consider whether we need to move away from a system that's so dependent on migrant labor. At the heart of such an alternative strategy would be the whole issue of finding industries closer to the place where these laborers are being released from agriculture in the villages. I think this you'll be familiar. Anyone familiar with the 2001 and 2011 census knows that there has been a massive increase in marginal workers, those who don't work for more than 6 months in a year, in in a multiplicity of districts to the north and east of the country, and the jobs that are emerging are primarily in the south and the west, which clearly leads to this phenomena of migrant workers. So if we need to intervene there and reduce the pressure of migration, we would need to consider setting up industrial centers in those areas. Now, this might seem a return to the to pre-liberalization days, and therefore we look like we are out of fashion and out of sync with the larger trends. But the fact is that there's no reason for us to abandon whatever lessons the past may have taught us. And one of the things like Bangalore, particularly in the 70s, did very well was to develop extensive industrial estates, which created the kind of uh, of infrastructure that workers needed both to stay and to work. And that gave them an advantage in a number of industries, particularly or labor intensive, low cost industries, like the garment industry. Bangalore went on to become a major garment exporter from nothing. And that was largely a matter of, I think, industrial estates. Now, whether a similar strategy can be used in states like Bihar or elsewhere is something worth considering. It will not even be seen by the WTO as a subsidy because WTO subsidies are product specific. But if you set up a major infrastructure, it reduces the costs of investors there, but without being seen or recognized as a subsidy. So I would like to emphasize, if you're coming down just to direct suggestions for the budget, the first I would like to stress is the importance of mobility in introducing mobility into our strategy for skilling. A static keeping skilling it at static positions, if you like, is an issue that raises opportunity costs for workers, and they made it clear that they're not willing to pay that opportunity cost by the intense pressure that's emerging on informal systems, including informal labor movement, informal hiring, a series of, we can call it contract, we can give it other names, but a large part of it is informal and beyond the existing labor laws. So while there has been talk about the importance of changing labor laws or modifying it, the fact is that it is being bypassed. And we need to see how you're going to manage that. So that is one thing, whether you need to invest in that in this budget. The second element that I would put up for some consideration is whether you can look back at the area of dispersed industrialization. We must recognize that states that have, for historic reasons, done better with dispersed urbanization, particularly Tamil Nadu, has also grown very rapidly. These states have tended to do much better in terms of overall growth rate. And that's understandable because dispersed industrialization not only captures labor without too much forcing them to move very much, but it also captures local capital in ways that other centralized patterns of industrialization don't always do. I'll just stop there, but just emphasizing these 2 points of dispersed industrialization and mobility in trade.
Thank you, Professor Pani. You made some interesting suggestion on industrial estates and in skilling. Very quickly, because part of this is a little debate, let me give you or give an example. I think those suggestions are important in themselves, but let me give you a particular case of Delhi where, when the wages went up, I talked to industrialists who moved their plants to a neighboring area in Haryana. Specifically, it was halfway between Panipat and Delhi. And they advertised for local people for that industrial unit. And he told me that they got 4 applications, of which 3 were completely unsuitable. Right. And 1 was worth interviewing, but was not worth hiring. So they actually did exactly what you're saying. They went to a labor contractor agent, whatever one calls it, and got people from Bihar and Eastern UP. So one has to keep these things in mind but I think the 2 suggestions 2 or 3 suggestions you have made are in any case worth considering, whatever the nature of the migration. Next, so thank you. Next, let me, I'll just go by the order which was there. Professor Nripendra Sarma, who is the professor and director at CIQA KKH State Open University, Guwahati.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir. We are taking part in a very important discussion, this budget 2021. And here in this regard, I would just like to state that this budget 2021 is very significant because till 1990 we had a phase, and 1991 onwards we had another phase, and we have experienced 2019 COVID scenario, and 2020 has been a very bad year, and 2021 has to be a trendsetter. And this budget we just should not consider as an annual statement of receipt and expenditure, because some of the budgets have made some very far-reaching impact also. Say, I am from Northeastern region. The Northeastern Development Financial Corporation of India was started because of a budget intervention only. And I'll just share some of the perspectives from Northeastern region. And as regards this budget, as we all know, being an annual statement of receipt and expenditure, one point that I would like to make as far as the receipt part is of the budget, because of this COVID-19 situation, we are having lots of uncertainties. So receipt part will have to maybe under promise and will have to be conservative. But as far as the expenditure part is concerned, we'll have to always be concerned about high quality spending. So with that in mind, I'd just like to propose, and I'd just like to pick up the thread from Mr. Narendra Pani's discussion as well as on the observation by our chairperson on the industrial investment. Here in this case, I would just like to say that in Northeastern region, the Northeastern Industrial Investment Promotion Policy was launched, and till 2017, it was in full spirit. And because of that, though there has been certain criticism, but the thing is that because of NEIIP, some of the national companies, maybe some international multinational corporations also, have set up their facilities in the northeastern part, and they have been availing the benefits of, say, transport subsidy, capital subsidy, or say employment incentive, etc. 2017 onwards, this Northeastern Industrial Development Scheme is in vogue, and here also the industries have been benefiting. And not only these industries, right, you were talking about the skilling part, and more or less we have been able to take up the skilling requirements in the sense that the local people, the local youths are absorbed, so they have been able to generate employment, and the local people are getting benefit, mostly in the non-executive cadres. Even in executive cadres also, the local people have been able to meet up the demand. So the absorption of Northeast in terms of these developmental schemes, and they have been able to capitalize on these schemes. That is one aspect. But the thing is that this GST reimbursement, or say transport subsidy, or say capital subsidy, all these need to be strengthened further. And we have seen a number of MSMEs in the export industrial parks have closed down. And all this cannot be attributed to COVID-19. Some of these can be attributed to management inefficiency also. But at the same time, we cannot fully deny the importance of the developmental schemes and the facilitation by the government of India in terms of this. Though Northeastern region, the Seven Sisters, and later on Sikkim has been included, more or less the Ministry of Development of Northeastern region, Donor Ministry, Northeastern Council, several initiatives have been made, but there, as it appears, there has been a lack of concerted action. So that needs to be, and I just like to substantiate my point in terms of industrial investment. Third point that I like to make in this 2021 budget is that many times this transport, travel, and then hotel, recreation, tourism we have been talking about. But one thing mostly we are ignoring, that is about the inland water transportation. And many of the budgets, right, and as I have told at the beginning, that the budgets can make some interventions which have got far-reaching implications. And here I feel this inland water transportation, many times it has been neglected. And in Northeastern, more especially in Assam, where the state domestic product, there has been a fall, the unemployment rate has been increasing. So we need some investment in some sectors which have got multiplier effects. So here in this regard, in addition to this tourism, etc., which are known for its multiplier effects, but inland water transportation, say Northeastern cargo, only 6% can be attributed to inland water. But whereas in case of Bangladesh, it has been attributed as 32%. We are having two strong rivers, Barak and Brahmaputra, more especially Brahmaputra, with some very strong tributaries. It has got a river network, it's just a system, but we have not been able to give enough trust on this. So this inland water should be a trust area as far as 2021 budget is concerned, because of its environmental benefits, because of its benefits in terms of ensuring logistics, transportation, in terms of its employment generation potential, and all this. That is one aspect. Then reforms in land, labor, capital, technology, all these ongoing approach should be strengthened. That is another expectation, because the GDP growth, right, below 6% growth in GDP will not be able to catch up the requirements of sustainable development goal. We need to go for a 7% or beyond that GDP growth. So where from that money will come in terms of budget, this receipt and expenditure. So we'll have to mostly from the public sector disinvestment. To that extent, the public sector managerial efficiency will be highly determined. So to that extent, we'll have to be concerned about that. And then ultimately, I would just like to end with, because we have been told that not to go for repetition of all the points. So, but at the same time, I should point out one common man's expectation, because of this mostly COVID-19 situation, that is a reality, though there could be duplication, but at the same time, we cannot rule it out. The thing is that in terms of medical expenditure, in terms of the health insurance scheme, in terms of the testing mechanism, all these things, there has to be some kinds of incentive for the common people so that they can go for the medical test, they can go for the treatment. So with these few points, I would just like to end up, sir. Thank you. Thank you. I initially missed the initial part of the discussion. So if there was some mandate for the speakers, but I have missed, sir.
So no problem. Do you have a minute? So I'm going to ask you a question. One, of course, I should point out, I think that very useful suggestion on inland water transport. Clearly, I thought things were moving, but maybe there's a scope for a lot more to be done, especially in Assam. So that's a very useful point. You mentioned land. Land, just for my knowledge, do you have any suggestions with respect to land? Because land is a state subject. So if you have any points on that, we still have a minute.
Not in terms of budget. That was just a peripheral.
Yeah. Okay, fine. Okay, thank you. Yeah. No, if there's a general point also, it'd be useful. But it's fine if you finished, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, so Professor Upindra Sawhney, I think, is not well, so she's not joining us. So we can turn to the fourth speaker, which is Professor Bijoy Kumar Singh, Professor of Economics from Manipur University. So we'll have more on the Northeast. Professor Singh.
Thank you, Dr. Abir. On this very important topic. We have some issues which we consider to be of importance for the Northeastern, particularly, and we realized that we had very little room for any maneuver in the earlier budget because this pandemic actually unfolded after a budget had been presented. But this time, we have the challenge to incorporate the pandemic and its implications fully in the budget, in addition to our usual objectives. So we are actually trying to incorporate which is unfolding and whose many dimensions are still quite unknown. The issues that I would like to flag for the Northeast. Any budget involves many assumptions in the nature of predictions, and many times how good a budget is depends on how good the predictions are. In current context, as I said, the prediction is a very big challenge, and there seems to be a consensus that a new normal would emerge, necessitating big changes in policy. So this is where I would like to chip in, because while many people think that the region is doomed to backwardness, we believe that the current state of backwardness is due to our inability to understand the drivers of growth in the region. It was therefore no surprise that the region lagged behind, regressing from a highly vigorous region to a region hopelessly dependent on the center. However, the last few years have shown the emergence of green shoots in a very, very dry landscape. The focus on connectivity and AGIS policy has helped in creating an environment highly conducive to growth, though many people still question the physical infrastructure and its adequacy, doubting the effectiveness of the policy. We would like to assert that the real effect of extant policies has been in nurturing self-confidence among the people, particularly the youth. An entrepreneurial class is emerging. Their reach has dramatically grown. This trend has been strengthened by our pursuit for the Sustainable Development Goals as part of the worldwide effort. This, together with the initiative of the NITI Aayog to develop a Vision 2030 document of every state, has created a very, very promising environment. It is clear from the SDI index published by NITI Aayog that the states in the region are no longer laggards. In many dimensions, front runners. The point is that after many decades, economic policies are beginning to yield good results. And this trend should not be allowed to get confounded because of the need for radical changes in the economic policies dictated by this pandemic. This pandemic actually can trigger serious local problems, and the pandemic dictates change everywhere. My request is that, as far as the Northeast is concerned, the policies that we have been pursuing so far should be actually protected, should be continued as far as possible, so that the good results that are emerging are allowed to mature. And it is very important because for many decades, policies were not really yielding much result. So this actually, this this beginning should not be allowed to be disrupted, actually diverted by the need for radical changes in the economic policies. And in fact, the finance minister has mentioned about actually big changes in policies. Now my feeling is that when you talk about big changes in the policies, we should really actually have some second thoughts on the developments in this region. Now, as of now, the resource base of the state in the region is actually the second point that I want to make is about resource base. The resource base also is quite narrow, and most of the resources are coming from the center. And if the fund flows are pegged to central revenues, so that also again has to be has to be protected. Actually, if flows from the center somehow diminish, now that is going to affect the ability of these states and their policy programs, And this sort of hand-holding exercise should continue for some time, And in fact, the budget exercises for this 2021 must have actually gone already. I mean, we will see it when the real documents emerge. And the third point is that this pandemic shows how unpredictable is change, And we have every reason to believe that such changes are going to impact us more frequently than before, given our uncontrolled intervention in nature. Planning for such change will be meaningful only when our citizens have the flexibility and mobility to respond quickly to such change. This calls for human capital formation. So we have to focus on this. Planning for human capital formation calls for a stock taking of human capital and strengthening the institutions where life skills can be imparted. So this is very important because even though by planning we mean getting ourselves prepared for the future, in this context, we have very little knowledge about the future which is going to unfold in the near future. And so therefore, we have to focus more on human capital formation. And another point which is actually in line with this is that the region, particularly the Northeastern region, actually is a very, very census, but somehow we have not been able to utilize the resources, So with this focus on human capital formation and development of capabilities, we definitely be able to do better, Then we have the third point. The third point, which is directly related with the budget, is that we are actually in a way bound by our FRBM regulations, But for the time being, because this is a big crisis, we need not be bound by these things, At least for the time being, for this budget, at least, we actually can go for higher fiscal deficits and other things which actually which may mean actually again violation of the FRBM Act. And this should be applicable not only to the union government but also to the states as well. We have to mobilize resources, and right now there's a question of life and death, and being a very, very significant health crisis. So we have to ensure that the resources reach us in time. Resources reach the frontline warriors in time. So the FRBM Act has to be substantially relaxed for this purpose. Then coming to the next point, what I would like to say is that, of course, the government is spending a very small percentage of the expenses to GDP on health. This is enhanced, but again, Northeastern region also has a reputation of having a very, very good record in the this containment of this COVID-19, or at least in the first few months, And so there was some talk about the specialty of the diets and all that. For this particular region, So that needs to be investigated properly. And I must say that Mizoram remain the only state in the country without any COVID-19 related casualty for many months. Subsequently, I mean, they had a few. Then we have the issue of the migrant laborers, which Professor Pani also had mentioned. One of the characteristics of the Northeastern region is that many of our people are working in metropolitan cities, like Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore. Now, most of them have come back, and from the actually from the information that we have is that they are actually they're actually not also willing to. They are not going to go back very soon. So they also have to be provided for. So what this means is that we have to provide for not only the new. I mean, this not only when I say these migrant laborers, but also for the unemployed people. So migrant workers. So they have to be accommodated, and so Atmanirbhar Bharat has many opportunities for such workers, and the funding for such schemes should be enhanced. Now, the funding is there, but the funding in the Atmanirbhar Bharat again is tackle these issues. So it needs to be enhanced. When we assess the package announced by the Indian government also, given the widespread demand destruction, this package is actually not adequate. So these are the basically the issues that I want to in this.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much.
You mentioned so many issues that it's hard to summarize, but what struck me, which others perhaps had not so far mentioned, was the emphasis you said on human capital and institutions for dealing with pandemic. I'm sure many others have that thought, but it's good you mentioned it. Now let me move on to Professor Vigneshwara Swami, Professor Finance, IBS, Hyderabad.
Thank you, sir. Good evening to all. As Dr. Arvind Virmani sir has rightly said, I would like to go with the template as he suggested, with the bullet points instead of explaining much, so that within the limited time, many aspects can be presented. As we all know, right now, India is in the stage of the vaccination. Now they are expecting the vaccine for COVID, and in the coming few months, India will experience vaccination program, and it will take much time and energy of the administrative machinery. And also the world over, there has been a lot of uncertainty with regard to the economic revival. So in this background, I think this particular budget, and also keeping in view the next decade's expectations of economic growth for this country, this budget has to come in a very big way, and it has to be implemented in a very swift way. Otherwise, what happens, as we all know, the fiscal policy implementation is always having some time lags. And this time lag will again further it will extend the impact, and in the process, the expectations of the budget may not be fulfilled in an expected way, rather. So, keeping all these things in view, the futuristic approach, and as the present government has been insisting and emphasizing about Naya Bharat, or the new India. So, to meet the expectations of new India, what can be done? The first and foremost point that comes to my mind is, since last 4 years, our economy has been experiencing a sluggish economic growth, even before the COVID pandemic arrived. So keeping these things, which are some concerns in the Indian economy, this budget has to be a big bang budget. Of course, in 2014, when the new government came, we all expected that they will come with a big bang budget. But the people in the government explained later that no, they want to go in a very steady way. Of course, but this country, India, which is the hallmark of democracy, we enjoy and we celebrate these elections. Unfortunately or fortunately, these elections keep happening. In the process, they affect the focus of implementation of the administrative machinery across the states and also from the central government as such. And the code of conduct restrictions, all these things, they come in the way and they blunt the effective implementation of the budget announcements. So keeping all these things in view, I feel that we should now first immediately go for boosting the consumption because the demand has to increase. Then only we can experience or we can expect the growth to further. And as we all know, to double our farmers' income and also to attain the 5 trillion economy size, we need to grow not less than 9%. So looking at the past and also the present, I feel this budget has to focus more on enhancing the aggregate consumption. That will help in creating more aggregate demand, and in turn, we can expect the furthering or the growing enhancement of the economic growth. So what can be done in this regard? The important point that comes to my mind right now is rationalize the direct tax structure. If you rationalize the direct tax structure, there will be money in the hands of the people. When money is there in the hands of the people, the individual is the right person to decide how that money has to be consumed. In the process, it will further more production in the economy, and production will further create more job employment opportunities for the workforce. So that's why I suggest to boost the consumption, the immediate thing the budget can do right now is to enhance the tax exemption up to at least 7.5 lakhs. In the process, much of money can be in the hands of large section of the middle class who are paying the taxes, and that will also boost up the sentiment as well in the economy. And in the same process, some adjustments can be made, some exemptions can be enhanced in the tax structure so that it can propel the consumption in the economy. And also, we have been seeing that the investment in pension funds up to rupees 50,000 has been exempt so far. But I feel this has to be enhanced up to rupees 2 lakh rupees. Why? Because these kind of long-term investments will definitely help in growing up the investment needs, and it will meet the saving needs of this nation. So that's why we need to encourage the pension funds exemptions up to rupees 2 lakh rupees. That's what I feel. And coming to the ATC section of income tax, because many of the large section of this, the middle class, they feel that ATC is one which is limiting their savings up to only 1.5 lakhs. And this has been there for several years. This can be increased to 3 lakh rupees so that there will be a whole lot of positivity amongst the public. And in the process, it will boost the consumption also, and also savings also. Then for senior citizens, the limit for tax-free fixed deposits in the banks has been only for 1 lakh rupees for several years. And this can also be considered to be increased to 3 lakh rupees. So these are some of the important measures which can boost the consumption in the immediate extent to help meet the budget expectations. The second important highlight that I want to mention is the employment generation. In some quarters of the economy in this nation, there are some noises saying that employment has not been generated adequately. Of course, there has been, we have experienced some kind of a migration crisis, and the migration labors, all those issues we have faced. So keeping in view all these things, there is a need to create more jobs. And in this country, for several years, we have been talking about MSMEs. Of course, MSMEs are very important, but they have not been successful in meeting the employment needs of the people. They have not been job creators in a big way as such so far. So keeping these things in the background, I'm not saying that MSMEs have to be ignored. They are very important. But at the same time, industrialization has to take place in a big way. The big industries can absorb more youth into their production activities, and at the same time, they create efficiency in the use of resources. Most of the times in MSMEs, we see because of the low level of technology of production, wastages of the resources happen. And we cannot afford that kind of wastages in our economy where we have a very huge population. So keeping those things in view, I feel we need to encourage large industries which can generate large number of jobs. And to do that, the EPF exemptions are what the government can come up. Already it has done in some of the sectors. And the tax concessions for such kind of industries can be announced. And also, there should be a proactive the approach of the government, particularly from the industry department, to encourage the industries to come up in a big way. And then the HUDCO, because in creating more jobs, the housing sector plays a very important role. The HUDCO can be mandated to construct some affordable housing clusters in the taluka levels also. So far, it has been doing it in some district level, something like that. So why can't it be pushed to go to the taluka levels also? Because there is a growing population across the country which needs a proper housing. And to meet the housing needs, the HUDCO can take proactive measures and create more affordable housing clusters. It can create more jobs where it can accommodate the semi-skilled laborers also. So this is one thing the government can look into. And then coming to another one important infrastructural area, that is the transport infrastructure. We have been proposing, the government has proposed expressways, particularly the Mumbai-Delhi expressway has been proposed. It has been taking shape. But in the same way, I feel to connect the important major cities of the country with the ports, because nowadays ports are coming up in a big way and they are contributing to the national economic growth. That's why there should be an approach to link these major cities to the ports. So I suggest that Bhopal city can be linked to Mumbai, and then Hyderabad can be linked to Visakhapatnam port, Raipur can be linked to Paradeep, and then Patna can be linked to Kolkata, and then Chandigarh can be linked to Jaipur to Kandla via Jaipur. Like that, some detailed study can be initiated, and at least if not all can be introduced in the present budget, at least one or two can be contemplated, so that it will enhance the infrastructural facilities for production as well as moving those goods to the destinations. And another aspect in this transportation infrastructure is the suburban railway lanes. If you bring down the infrastructural, the transportation costs, it will be a multiplier effect for the economic growth also. So the suburban railway lanes for major cities can be contemplated on a prioritized model, because this will help in moving the people from one place to another to perform their various job roles. And that will save a lot of energy as well as a lot of time of the human capital of this country. And then coming to another one, my favorite topic is the irrigation infrastructure. We always claim that India is a great country with a lot of dependence on agriculture, our farmers, annadatas, so many goody words we use. But we need to look at creating a proper irrigation infrastructure for these so-called annadatas. Why? Because in most of the parts of India, the farmer is still dependent on agriculture and this rain-fed irrigation. That means whatever rains come through the monsoons or the another area, monsoons from the northwest. So he depends more on this kind of the vagaries of this rains. So to overcome that, we can take up the linking of rivers. Of course, this is not a new idea as such, but Ganga Kaveri project, which was earlier suggested by K.L. Rao when he was the minister, that has to be implemented or given a proper shape, so that this will create more job opportunities. At the same time, it provides water, and it will solve multiple problems of this economy. Whereas it will also overcome the floods, and it will provide drinking water, which is again going to help the health infrastructure or the healthiness of the people. And then irrigation, it will provide irrigation, and then it will create more job opportunities. And then industrialization also can take place along those canals or the lift irrigation projects that come up right from Bihar to Tamil Nadu. So this is one important idea which the government should seriously think, so that the many problems can be addressed in one irrigation infrastructure project. And massive irrigation infrastructure projects across Brahmaputra, especially my friends from Northeast, they said Brahmaputra is a very mega river, and that can accommodate very many infrastructure projects. And then Brahmaputra, Ganga, Kosi, other rivers can be looked into, so that the needy areas can be addressed, and then avoid flooding also can be done. And then another important infrastructural aspect is energy. Energy sufficiency and energy adequacy for this economic growth is very important. We need to go for cleaner energy. So cleaner energy, the best source is solar energy. So solar units have to be mandated for all new houses which are going to be constructed with the government support or government subsidies or whatever those things. And also large industries also should be mandated to go with this kind of solar unit, so that they can harness this cheap and clean energy, so that we can also contribute to climate change efforts. And another important area where I want to emphasize much is from my experience from financial economics studies, that is the financial sector. The third wave of financial sector reforms are very much required because in the last 4 years, if we see, it seems that a slight level of decrease in the trust of the banking system is seen across the country. The banking system has been facing some troubles, some bank runs and failures and scams, and the number of frauds that are happening. These are causing some concerns amongst the minds of the people, and in the process, the customers' confidence in the banking system is at somewhat questionable stake. So, to create a Naya Bharat, there is an impending need to go for financial sector reforms, more particularly in the banking sector, and also to bring in the foreign institutions to fund various projects in this country. There is a need to create a second International Financial Services Center, IFSC, at Bangalore. Right now, we have one in Gujarat, that is Gandhinagar, Gift City. And only one gift city is not enough for a large country or a massive country like India. So I suggest there should be one more IFSC at Bangalore, because there is a lot of electronic industry, software industry, garment industry, and it can cater to the needs of the southern states as well. And then there is a need to, of course, this is not a new idea. I'm saying this bond market in India has been suffering. There have been several comments in the past, also suggestions in the past, but still it is requiring a lot of attention from the government, because it has to be developed to meet the infrastructure financing needs of the economy. And then RBI, with regard to the supervision aspects and regulatory aspects, I feel it is overburdened. For a massive country like India, one institution, RBI, cannot handle many of the growing needs of this economy, and also particularly the financial sector supervision and regulation. So some specialized agencies of regulations should be formed, so that the burden on the one institution, that is RBI, can be reduced. And also, I feel that the expert committee on financial sector reforms can be announced, so that they can look into these important issues and the recommendations can be timely implemented. And one more aspect of the financial sector area is the shadow banks. The NBFC's crisis, which we experienced in 2017 and 18, the LFS crisis has told us a number of lessons. So, borrowing from those lessons, the government has to now come up with a proper mechanism to encourage the shadow banking system, and also to properly regulate and supervise these shadow banks, so that they can be catalytic in the efforts of economic growth process in this country. And one more thing which is now bothering much in the financial sector is the PSP bank recapitalization. The government has already issued infused around 3.15 lakh crores in the public sector banks in the last 11 years, but still a lot of money has to be pumped into these banks. So recapitalization of this banking system is very much important, particularly the public sector banks. They require a lot of focus. And then the mission Indradhanush, which was announced by the Modi government, needs to be now reviewed. How far it has been successful in terms of meeting its objectives has to be looked into. Unfortunately, we have not heard much about this, the results or the outcomes of this mission Indradhanush. And also because now the country is moving towards digital infrastructure, digitalization of financial transactions. So a proper digital financial infrastructure can be thought of, and the idea can be mooted through this budget, and the efforts should be made so that the financial system through the digital mechanisms can be effectively prospered and also effectively regulated. And one more concern for the depositors of the banking sector is about the deposit insurance. Let us say a retired person or a senior citizen has deposited his lifetime earnings in the banks. Right now, the deposit insurance stands at 5 lakh rupees per account. But that needs to be enhanced up to at least rupees 25 lakhs so that the confidence of the depositors, particularly the senior citizens, can be enhanced and the banking sector can benefit from those kind of deposits. And another 2 points I have, if the time permits. Sir, can I move to these points?
You've taken 18 minutes, double the time of everybody else.
Then I will stop here, sir.
I'm even forgetting what you said in the beginning.
I'm very sorry. Then I will stop here. And I will join in case if there's any time.
Yeah, discussion it be because there are too many points even to. I would just say I guess you made very specific recommendations on personal income tax for consumption and investment, and of course a lot of other things in infrastructure, etc. So let me move on to our next speaker, which is Professor Aarti Chandani, who is Associate Professor, SIMS, Pune. Professor Aarti. Unmute, please. You're unmuted, that's fine. Yes. Hello, we can't hear you. Hello, just say testing, we can't hear you. Or Charan, can you check what's...
Professor Aarti.
Professor Aarti, we can't hear you. You don't seem to be muted, but I don't know what's wrong. Should we do the other person while Vivek checks out how to, maybe some setting on your computer? We should have checked them out earlier. Sorry, we can't hear you. Sharon, should we?
Let's go to Professor Narayan.
Yeah, let's go to Professor.
Can you hear me, sir, now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Is that Professor Aarti? Yeah. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay, go ahead. Now we can hear you. So maybe there was, yeah. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. So good evening to one and all present here. I will try to make sure that I cover the bullet points only. So
Yeah.
first I'll start with the vision of our Prime Minister Modi, who said that we need to be Atmanirbhar. And in order to achieve that, he has also announced that India should become a $5 trillion economy by 2025. And as Professor Swami said, that it is very difficult considering the growth what we are having. And in order to achieve that, we need to be growing at least at the rate of 9 to 10%, which is very difficult during this time. So what my special points or focus points are that we should promote the industry and how the industry should be promoted. Because as other speakers have also mentioned, that industry is something which will actually take India to its growth. So production should be increased. We should focus more on the exports, and our imports should be reduced. There is an important point here. Our industries are actually old-fashioned. We need to bring in more technology in the industry, which makes the industry as competitive, not only at the national level, but at the international level. Our industries are actually very less competitive. So there is a more scope of making the industry as competitive. And in order to do so, as Virmani sir also mentioned, that the land is the jurisdiction of the state, but we need to make the land available to the industries at low rate, or maybe some quota or something could be done. Otherwise, the land becomes very expensive, which is actually taking the overall cost of production becomes high considering the land. So land has to be given, especially to the industries which are being promoted here. Another study which we have seen, Nomura has done a study that due to US trade wars, many companies have shifted from China to other. India was seen to be a destination, but that is not the reality. India has received only out of the 56 companies which have shifted from China, India got only 3 companies. We have seen a major flow of the companies moving from China to the other part of the Asia, especially to Taiwan, Thailand, Vietnam. Now, why Vietnam? Vietnam has been considered to be a safe country because the way it has handled the pandemic. There was not even a single death in Vietnam. They reported less than 500 cases of COVID. So we need to create some sort of infrastructure, some sort of the ecosystem where we can promote not only the international infrastructure or the MNCs coming to India, but also for the domestic companies. So what we should do as a country, we should have a single window approval policy. Though we talk about that single window, but practically it is not there. We need to have a single window which is time bound. So time bound could be based on the requirement. It could be, for example, 90 days or 100 days. But when we talk about 100 days, it should happen in 100 days. It doesn't happen so. So there has to be a single window policy which should be equally applicable for our SMEs, should be applicable for our startups, because those are the companies which are going to play a major role in the overall growth story of India. So that's one point which I want to talk about from the industrial perspective. Similarly, when we talk about India in terms of ease of doing business, we see India has been ranked as 63. A country like Thailand, Taiwan, they are much ranked very less. If Thailand is ranked as 21, Taiwan is ranked as 15. So we need to understand that what we should do. And I hope that single window clearance policy will play a role in improving the India's rank for ease of doing business. And we see some sort of influx in terms of FDI as well as growth for our domestic companies and industries. So industries are to be promoted in a big way. And we need to promote, and I think I agree with the earlier speaker where Sir has said that we should focus not only on the migration. I hope if we are promoting the industries at the local level, this migration problem can also be tackled. When we are having the industries in those states where the labor is easily available, like Sir mentioned earlier, in Jharkhand, Bihar, or northern part of Uttar Pradesh. So we should focus on that. Another point which I just want to make about the GST, we need to have the GST which is much more user friendly. The GST penalties are to be decreased. Right now the penalties are very high, and there is a fear that should not be there. Similarly, the limit of non-compliance of GST should be increased. Right now there is what I get to know, or I have some of my friends who are having their companies. So there is a fear, there is a harassment by the departments on non-compliance. So that should not happen. We should promote some sort of body which can act as intermediary, which is imparting either the knowledge, education about the GST, the way we have IBC for the banking sector, though it's a different altogether, but we should have an intermediary which promotes or which educates people about the GST and the whole mechanism. And one last point which I want to mention, it's a general comment. India adopted a single child policy in 1980. We are in 2020. And 40 years ahead, we have not been able to adopt a policy with respect to population. Now, whatever we do, whatever reforms we do, I don't think we can do anything to serve a population of 130 crore. So we need to make concrete reforms or concrete policies here. We should make a two-child. I hope the BJP government or the Modi government has taken bold step in terms of doing some major reforms. We got demonetization, we got Article 370, we got GST. So those are the major reforms which could take place, and I hope that those could take place because the party is strong. You don't have much of opposition, so you can take bold and decision which are good for the country. So I believe we should go for a two-child policy to start with. We can take lesson from China, which has started this policy 40 years ago, and we have not been able to. Now, if we don't do it now, it's going to be very difficult. It will be like now or never. So we should focus on this, because whatever we do in terms of any sector you take, you talk about infrastructure, you talk about energy, FMCG, manufacturing, anything, financial sector, everything is going to be eaten up by the number what we have. The volume is too big to handle. So that's what is my general suggestion. I hope I have covered things in time.
Thank you. I'll just highlight two things you mentioned. One, of course, GST harassment. It's also connected with the complexity and the legacy systems. And so I'm glad you pointed that out. And the second one on ease of doing business, EODB. Now, they're really, if you look at the details of the EODB, there are 2 or 3 areas which kind of stand out as still negative. One of them is EODB in trade. So that is a central international trade, which is a central responsibility. But the other is land, asset transfers, and things connected with that, which are basically municipal and state level. So yes, I think we have to focus more on the details of it and try to remove them. Thank you for sticking to your 10 minutes. So we come to our last speaker, Professor M.R. Narayana, Professor of Fiscal Policy Institute, Bangalore.
Good evening. Am I able to reach out there? Yes. I have a small difficulty with regard to my video, and I see you all, but you can't see me. I don't think that is anyway.
That's fine. Your voice is very clear, which is more important.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I understand that fiscal policy in a very broad setting has multiple objectives, be it economic growth or economic stabilization, allocation, or distribution. From what I learned by my earlier speaker is that the focus has been by and large on the growth aspect of the Indian economy to be taken up by the next budget. But I shall go into focus on the distributional concerns that are of paramount importance at present and in future for the formulation of the Union Budget 2021 and 22. So my suggestion is that the Union Budget of the next year should actually recognize and also be responsive to certain distributional concerns thrown by the current COVID-19 pandemic. We have been experiencing a period of transition from 2019-20 budget, which was pre-pandemic, to 2020-21. Sorry, 2020-21 budget. We started when there was no pandemic. Now we are through the budget of 2020-21 as along with the pandemic, and 2021-22 will be a very big challenge in terms of post-COVID management of the economy. So we have a very big challenge of combining the transition of this year to the post-pandemic challenges of the budget 2020-21. Now, there are 2 issues here. We have to focus on the most poor and vulnerable sections of the society. Within the framework of the budgetary policy, I think there are 3 or 4 important stakeholders. I am talking about the poor at all ages and also poor by all categories of the society. I don't have any narrow definition of the poor. But it is also important that the budget should focus on the transitionary issues of the unorganized workers, including those who are migrant laborers and the contract laborers, let alone focusing on the casual and the self-employed. But it is also important from the distributional perspective that the budget should also recognize and be responsive to the issues of the unemployed. In my opinion, at present, when we are experiencing the transition under the COVID-19 pandemic, I think all the segments of our poor and vulnerable are exposed to greater risk and vulnerability, and that should explicitly be recognized and responded. Now let me come to one case where we want specific inputs to be given to the next year's budget. I pick up from the last speaker who mentioned about the Indian demography. Yes, Indian demography is now being attractive all over the world for two reasons. One, we have been having a higher share of the working age population, and even up to 2100, India shall going to maintain the highest share of total population in the working ages. And everybody is looking at India to see how India would going to reap the demographic dividend. But less recognized fact of the Indian demographic transition is in regard to the population aging. We are now having, I now refer to the United Nations population projection of 2019 revision, and for the year 2020, in the total estimated population of India, nearly 14 crore belong to the age group of 60 and above that we call elderly. And that actually constitute about 10% of the total population. And by year 2100, we are going to have not less than 35% of total population of India being elderly. Now, out of the elderly population above the age of 60, nearly 90% of them belong to the age group of 60 to 79, and the rest 9.52 belong to the age group of 80 and above. We have the National Social Assistance Program, which comprises different pension schemes, be it for disabled or widow. And other one important area which addresses the population aging is the Indira Gandhi National Old Age Pension Scheme. I would like to focus my input to the next budget on this aspect for two reasons. The National Social Assistance Program of the central government is contributing nearly 84% of the total pension benefit in the entire country. The rest is contributed by the state programs. And out of the National Social Security Program, 75% is concentrated on the Indira Gandhi National Old Age Pension Scheme. Therefore, if there is anything that we would like to reform in the next budget in regard to the social pension or non-contributory pension, I think it is the Indira Gandhi National Old Age Pension Scheme. Now, for the benefit of the audience here, I give only three design parameters which are important for my calculation later. The first design parameter is that there is an exclusionary class in terms of the age limit. 60 and above or the is the age group which is eligible. But those elderly who are in that age group must also belong to the BPL family. And therefore, there is a combination of age exclusion and also the economic exclusion. Therefore, it is designed for the poor, and any reform of this Indira Gandhi National Old Age Pension Scheme is going to be a distributive welfare scheme in the next budget. At present, the benefit of the pension is limited only for 200 rupees in the age group of 60 to 79 and 500 rupees above the age group of 80. And as on today, on the Merry Christmas, I have 2.5 crore beneficiaries of the Indira Gandhi National Old Age Pension Scheme, of which nearly 83% belong to the age group of 60 to 79. This is a very important concern. Now, what are the budget issues of the Union government next year? I may say these are not the issues, but challenges. Please believe me, ladies and gentlemen, since 2000 2011, when we made some changes in the design parameters of the scheme, the benefit level of the scheme has not been changed. 200 rupees for the age group of 60 to 79 and 500 rupees for the age group of 80 and above. This has not changed in spite of changes in India's inflation. This has not changed in spite of India's changes in the poverty level, and this has not changed in spite of India's rapid economic growth. So our benefits of this particular pension scheme for the civilians who are poor and elderly have not been responsive in terms of any of these changes. The second thing is the coverage of the beneficiaries is also very limited. At present, only about 17% of the total population of the age group of 60 and above are benefited. But my calculation shows that the poverty among the elderly is nearly 0.2. 20% of the elderly are poor. Even that percentage is not covered. Now, what should the next budget do for this particular pension? Now, in my opinion, the union government must now look for ways and means of increasing the benefit level of this pension and also the increase of the coverage from the 17% to more than 50 or 70 as the case may be. Now, I have calculated for the benefit of the Union Finance Ministry, what are the cost implications, fiscal cost implications for the next budget. I have calculated two scenarios. One, what is the share of the expected fiscal cost as per the revenue budget of the government of India? The other one is the GDP of India, for which was the revised estimates of 2019-20. I will give you one number. I can share the rest during the discussion. At the current level, the cost of the pension scheme for the union government is about 0.021% of the total revenue expenditure. Note that, 0.021. If I link the pension scheme to the poverty level, by taking the Tendulkar's poverty line of 1,000 for the urban India and recalculate the fiscal cost may slightly go up to 0.082, the marginal price. Now, if I want to give the benefit of poverty-linked pension benefit for the entire elderly population, the bill to the government of India is only about 0.105. Now, if I extend the entire elderly population with poverty-linked pension scheme, what it would cost to the union government is only 0.459, and much less to the union government is that there is a greater need to reform in terms of raising the benefit level and also expanding the coverage for the most needy in the society, the elderly and the poor. I think that is one vulnerable group or the poverty-stricken group which must be focused at long waiting for budgetary consideration. In fact, claiming better benefits in terms of the pension coverage and pension benefit should be the budgetary rights of the elderly population. This is my submission and suggestion for the union government for the next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You stuck to your time, and definitely I think a convincing case for reform of that program, both in terms of benefit rates, adjustment for inflation, I think is a very good idea. And of course, some increase in coverage. Very good suggestion. Thank you. As we thought we would run out of time, so we have barely, I think, 10 minutes for Q&A. Professor Charan Singh, have you noted some questions or what?
I think there is a question by Mr. Jadal, if he wants to ask his question himself. And I think Mr. Krishnandan Tripathi has a question. So we can ask them to ask their question directly.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Why don't you speak one by one? Yeah.
Sir, thank you for giving me this opportunity to ask a question. Sir, my question is to Charan sir, that FM Nirmala Sitharaman has just concluded pre-budget consultation meeting. So what is your suggestion as a EGROW Foundation what is your suggestion to Finance Minister for this project?
Well, I will answer that because we are holding a session on the 1st. You will hear all our suggestions. All the directors of EGROW will give individual suggestions. There'll be a whole coming out. So do watch the session on the 1st. You'll get that answer. Next.
Sir, I have
Mr.
one more question. Sir.
Go ahead.
Sir, as you have heard that last week Assembly said that this budget will be like never before. So what we can see in this budget? What new things, new announcement we can see in this budget?
Okay, well, we'll take, if somebody wants to answer that later. Mr. Tripathi?
Yes, sir. I have the same question because Nirmala Sitharaman just concluded her budget consultation, and she made this point that it will be a never budget like never before, and she identified some areas like there will be a focus on infra, digitalization, and health sector. So, could you please elaborate your thoughts on this thing?
No, we will be elaborating our thoughts. The people who are here have given their. If you have a specific question for that, our thoughts you can ask us on the 1st. Do watch
Okay,
them.
no
But if you
problem,
have any questions, people who are spoke today, that's it.
So I have question with regard to two things. First, there were some concrete suggestion regarding the personal tax proposals, increasing the investment limit, etc. Could he please elaborate the cost for the government? Because it is an year like never before, and the government finances are pretty weak. If the government expands the exemptions and deductions, so it will be a big hit. So whether he has calculated that the government will take?
Well, that's a valid question. I don't know if Professor Vigneshwara wants to answer it. If you do a couple of a minute or so.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Krishnavan Tripathi. My hunch is that the contribution of the direct tax, that is the personal income tax, to the kitty of the government is not that big when compared to the indirect taxes and other taxes. And the government has a number of other revenues, and government has to innovate different methods to raise its taxes instead of depending solely on this personal tax. Why I argue for this relaxation or exemptions in the personal tax is because this helps in boosting the consumption. This will greatly contribute towards augmenting the aggregate demand in the economy, which is the foremost priority currently at this stage. With
okay,
regard,
so the cost factor, you don't have the exact calculation. That's fine. Let's take some more. We only have 6 minutes left. Any other questions?
I got a suggestion.
Yeah.
I have got a suggestion to the budget.
Okay, very quickly, not more than 2 minutes.
Yes, sir. It is about the corporate social responsibility. Now, especially in this pandemic era, the government has collected so much of CSR amount from the many corporates. What I suggest is certification of the corporates, like environment ISO 14,000 and ISO 9,000, like that. There should be one certification for the corporates who seriously take up the CSR activities, so that the citizens of India also can support the corporates by purchasing their products. So in my opinion, the certification of the corporate based on the CSR implementation is in need of the hour.
Okay, that's a suggestion noted. Anybody else?
Sir, I have a follow-up question for Dr. Aarti Chandani. She suggested that our ever-growing population will eat up all our resources. Do you think the government has political courage to implement two-child policy in this country? Because every reform meets a lot of resistance from the people, maybe due to lack of communication.
Valid point, Professor Mr. Tripathi. Dr. Chandani, would you like to say something or?
Yeah, if we don't think that this government has the political courage, then I don't think that we will ever have it. So this is the government where we hope.
Okay.
Neither we had anything.
Yeah.
So that's the correct time, I believe.
Okay. Any other person? Any questions?
Ajay Pai has a question. Ajay.
Okay. Mr. Pai?
Thank you, sir. So my question is for Professor Swami. It's along the lines of what he said about boosting consumption and spending. So the question along that line is, how exactly do we work around this at a time when there's very high inflation? I mean, inflation is rising. At the same time, our budget financing has been excessive to a certain extent. How do we manage this in this sort of a environment when monetary policy transmission isn't doing great results? So that's the question.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
it's a good question, of course. Should I answer, sir?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Ajay, there should be a trade-off whenever we are facing the growth crisis. We are in a very terrific situation. We need to infuse growth in the economy. Growth only can solve many of the ills of this country. So to infuse more growth, there should be some trade-off, even though there can be a little higher level of inflation. And inflation should not be accepted as that, because there's anchor rate, what we say, as per our inflation targeting regime, that 4 plus or minus 2. That means 6% is the cutoff. No. When the economy is growing, when there is a special situation or an extraordinary situation, it can be crossed. This can be breached also. So we need not worry much about the inflation, even though there can be some amount of inflation. If the monetary policy or the growth process is going to enhance the growth rate, GDP growth rate, then it's always good. In that context, even across the world also, many of the economies are moving towards in this direction. So, and they feel that even there can be a little bit hike in the inflation that can be managed, but growth is foremost.
Thank you. Any other final questions? We have one question.
Yes,
yeah, who is it?
Yes, sir. Pavitra here from.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, please
sir,
go ahead.
Yeah. Sir, my question is, since due to this COVID-19 pandemic, that health infrastructure in India is very compared to the poor country. So in the budget, what the government of India should take the step to make actually good health infrastructure, because this point, I think this is the more important to build the health infrastructure for the country. And the second point is that we are passing through the highest rate of that unemployment in India. The second question also should address that how we can reduce the unemployment in India. What are the programs that the employment program government should give emphasis in this budget? Thank you, sir. These are the two questions that in the budget that the government should tackle.
Okay, anybody would like to answer that last question?
Yes, I will take that question with regard to the health.
Okay.
Especially my view, of course, I did not mention because of the lack of time, particularly in the backdrop of this the success of Ayushman scheme across the country, more particularly in Uttar Pradesh. It has seen a tremendous impact. And based on those experiences, what the government can do is, particularly for women, there should be a provision of free healthcare. That's what my strong suggestion is, so that the women of this country should be extended with the health insurance coverage to the level of around 5 lakhs per year, so that the women, if they are healthy, the entire family will be healthy, and they're also contributing to the economic growth of this nation in a very big way. So this will add up to the health infrastructure in the process, and the people, particularly the rural women, they will be benefited to a larger extent. So, and also a Nari Swavalamana allowance can be introduced to the extent of rupees 2,000 per woman, so that the women below the BPL level can take care of the health needs through this particular cash, that is what we call as the direct benefit transfers. So these measures can augment the health infrastructure in the country.
Thank you. As I feel that Professor Pani used the least amount of time, would you like, if you want to add anything on some other point, one point or so, besides the one you already made? It's up to you.
The larger issue, which I think has been debated and will be debated further, but I think the issue of just how much inflation can you risk at this point? Because there is, when your economy is recovering and you have a severe supply constraint, the whole process becomes very inelastic. The impact of or the price that ends up quite inelastic because your output is fixed in many areas. And the inflation rate may not be entirely indicative of the actual pressures in the economy. It could be circumstantial. You have periods when it has gone up. You have supply constraints. You have various things that are coming into place. I'm not so sure that a national inflation rate is the best indicator at a time when additional sort of resources is desperately needed. So a little bit of a leeway, just treating it as a kind of a measurement margin, can be taken into account.
Right. So you kind of answered one of the questions raised. Thank you. So with that, let me hand it over to Professor Charan Singh. Do you want to make some concluding remarks?
Yes, I want to first of all thank all the panelists. On 25th of December, they have agreed to come and participate in the Friday webinar series of EGROW Foundation. So I want to thank each of the panelists who have prepared so well and agreed. And I want to also thank all the participants who have spent time to be with us today. The announcement that I would like to make is, which our chairman has already made, next week on January 1, we are going to have another session on the union budget suggestions. And in that session, we will have the EGROW Foundation members as well as Professor Ashima Goel from IGIDR speaking to us about suggestions for the union budget. I would like to invite each one of you to please come and participate and benefit from the discussions on January 1. With this, once again, thanking our own chairman, Dr. Virmani, to host the event, as well as the participants and the panelists for today's event. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.